everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Angel Moreno, Digital Policy Manager at TIC Council. That for those who doesn't know us, yes, we are the International Trade Association representing the testing, inspection, and certification industry. And well, as you may know or not, October is the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and at TIC Council, that's one of our main digital priorities. Together with AI, we wanted to close out this month by hosting this webinar, which on this occasion will be focused on the EU cybersecurity landscape. Of course, the EU is already a global leader when it comes to cybersecurity legislation, no? But with upcoming Radio Agreement Directed Delegated Act and the Cyber Resilience Act, the impact on consumers, manufacturers, and other stakeholders will be even more significant than what is already today. And this is why this brings us to today's theme, the road ahead of these two pieces of legislation I just mentioned, that will transform into a reality very, very soon. On the one hand, the Red Delegated Act will be mandatory to comply with for manufacturers as of August 2025. That's in 9 months. And anticipated Cyber Resilience Act, likely the first horizontal cybersecurity legislation worldwide with such a broad scope, also affecting consumers' devices and IoT, not only critical sectors as we were accustomed before. It's expected to enter into force very, very soon in the coming weeks. So yesterday, maybe before I present the panelists, I was preparing for today's session, and I came across this very good graph that traced the rise in mentions of the word cybersecurity and IT security in EU documents since the 1990s until today. And of course, unsurprisingly, 2023 marked the highest number of reference, with over 1,100. But the most significant thing I saw while reading this study was the very first document in the EU, which included some reference to cybersecurity. It was this Council resolution back in 2002. Back at that time, I was only 3 years old. So in this early mention, the document called for a unified approach to network and information security. And it encourages basically to foster collaboration between member states, the European Commission, and industry stakeholders, which for me is this call for cooperation still resonates deeply in today's cybersecurity landscape. However, of course, the challenges in terms of cybersecurity have changed a lot as compared to 2002 until today, but the goals, I think, remain intrinsically similar, emphasizing the need to collaborate across the public and private sector, and maybe just as a final remark, I think what we all need to do, different stakeholders, is to keep building and fostering digital trust, to make sure that digital technologies, today we're talking about cybersecurity, but it can be also AI and others, are safe and secure for businesses, society, and people, to minimize the risk so that we can fully benefit from them. And then if this is why we can jump to the next slide. I'm very happy that we are joined today by these diverse representatives from consumer organizations, manufacturers, policymakers on the Commission, and of course, TIC representatives, showing that cybersecurity is a cross-sectional field. And then without further ado, I think we can start with the first panel. I will briefly present the speaker, and as we'll be talking and presenting our latest position paper on the Red Delegated Act with our view on the scope and also an overview of the 18031 series. And in this occasion, I'm happy to present you to our speaker, Nuria Carreo, who is the Technical Director for Cybersecurity Certification in A+ Laboratories. Nuria has over 14 years of experience where she gained a specialization in hardware security evaluations, technologies like smart cards, evaluation guidelines, attack methods, and vulnerability assessments. And basically, at her current role, she leads the technical team in achieving compliance with emerging European standards in cybersecurity. What makes you, Nuria, perfect speaker for this first panel. The floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Angel, for the kind introduction. I'm going to try to share my screen so you can, Angel, maybe tell me if everything is right and you can see it.
It's perfect. We can see it.
Good. Okay, so, welcome everyone to today's TIC Council webinar. So, as Angel said, today we will be diving into the recently published position paper, which is the TIC Council's view on the scope of the Delegated Act and the EN 1831 series. And we are going to divide the presentation into the same sections of the position paper. So we are going to put some context and purpose of this paper. We're going to give you some recommendations for manufacturers that we believe they are good for all to know. We'll go through the considerations on the scope for the products that are inside or not of this Red Delegated Act with cybersecurity provisions. We're going to later on talk about some cases scenarios, and finally to make an overview on the EN 8031 series. Okay, so first let's set the stage with some context. So the Radio Equipment Directive serves as the key regulatory framework in Europe, addressing the various challenges for the radio equipment, including the cybersecurity. So mainly outlines the specific cybersecurity requirements that must be placed in the EU market, okay? This is particularly known as the Articles 3.3 T, E, and F, okay? So to directly address these cybersecurity provisions, the Red Delegated Act on Cybersecurity was introduced. And under this Delegated Act, an standardization request, which it's fortified through the work that has been issued, the EN 8031 series, okay? Basically, these cybersecurity requirements address, let's say, the main good consequences of this standardization request, the Red and the Red Delegated Act. It's to improve the network resilience, to protect the consumer privacy and data security, and also reduce the risk of monetary fraud. As Angel stated before, we have the date we are very close to the date that becomes effective, because the 1st of August of 2025 will be mandatory for placing this radio equipment on the EU market. Okay, so just to say, why is this, are these initiative important? Well, the first thing is that the Council welcomes the European Commission efforts in strengthening the cybersecurity of the IoT devices, okay? Ensuring secure and trustworthy IoT devices for European consumers, it's essential for achieving the digital decade targets for 2030. And it also strengthens the competitiveness and security across Europe, okay? So that's why we believe that effective implementation and enforcement will be critical. So what is the purpose of this paper? Well, this is, as we said here in the disclaimer, this is not a legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, okay? But this paper provides, let's say, a summary of all the discussions and the current state of these discussions among the TIC Council members. So it's reflecting our common interpretation, and it can also serve as an input for discussions for policymakers, and maybe why not to some agreements and guidance, later guidance for industry. So let's move to recommendations. So there's mainly 4 recommendations for the manufacturers that we would like to highlight. First of all, would be to adopt a proactive approach to security. And this is not because of the date, which is very close and it's approaching, but it is because the manufacturer bears full responsibility for conducting a cybersecurity risk assessment and choose appropriate compliance procedures. So the cybersecurity risk assessment may imply some design changes or security measures in implementations. So it is highly recommended to perform this on early development phase. And you should bear in mind that this should be maintained through the whole product's life cycle. The Council recommends the guidance or the report of ETSI, which is 103.935. So it's an assessment of cyber risk based on products properties, as you see here. it can help you to have some guidelines on how to do this risk assessment. And also, this risk assessment informs for the identification, evaluation, selection, and application of risk treatment that reduce the overall risk exposure of the product. And it is good because, well, it also takes into account the product casuistics and the environment. The second recommendation that you would see in the paper is get ready before August 2025. And to give you some advice on what are the steps that you would need to follow in case that you are still lost or if there is something that you don't know how to address, it's seek guidance on the notified bodies. So they have all the information, they are updated on the new guidance coming up and so on. And additionally, they will help you to identify these major gaps that are crucial to find just before this date that it's approaching. Additionally, another recommendation could be to maintain a well-structured documentation. Well, the EN series already provides you some insights on how should be the evidence, or at least you can, it's intuitive to find some structure on how to, let's say, generate this documentation in order to streamline the compliance of the Red Delegated Act and the standards that are in place. Additionally, you should take into account that it's the EN 1831, which is not yet harmonized, but it is good that you monitor these standards, you monitor both development and the publication, because you will benefit of this presumption of conformity. So if it's harmonized, of course. And finally, it's important to take a look on the interplay between this Red Delegated Act, Red Directive, and other coming up regulations such as CRA. So we will have maybe some more insights in the next talk on what would be the interplay between these two regulations. The third recommendation would be become familiar with the conformity assessment options. So nowadays we don't have an harmonized standard yet. It's not yet published on the official journal, but you can still go through a third-party assessment using model B plus C or H, okay? In this kind of models, you can also opt for applying a non-harmonized standard, which is, for example, the well-known ETSI 3.3645 or the industrial standard 62443. But there's still a delta need here, and you need to go through the third-party assessment. So nowadays, this is the only option that you have. But what happened later on? So once we have the standard harmonized, so you can benefit from the presumption of conformity, you can go through the model A to do a self-assessment, okay? You are not obligated to use a notified body, but you are free to choose to involve a notified body in order to strengthen the security and ensure compliance, or if you are unsure of some specific requirements and so on. Here in the paper, you can find, I believe, quite a schematic, but it is very straightforward flow that explains where you can apply a harmonized standard and what is the model that you can use in case that harmonized standard is there and it's fully applied. So in case that the harmonized standard is not fully applied or it's not there, then you should go to a third-party assessment through model B plus C or model H. And the fourth recommendation would be, well, you need to understand how to use the harmonized standard, because as we said, you need to perform a thorough risk assessment as a manufacturer, and it may happen that the harmonized standard does not cover all identified risks. So if the harmonized standard in the best option, if the harmonized standard covers all the identified risks, then you can benefit from this presumption of conformity. But if you are not covering, so the standard is not covering all the identified risks from your risk assessment, then you need to justify and address the security measures to make essential requirements from the RED directive article 3.3 EDEF fulfilled. Okay, you can find more information in the European Commission steps to fix the CE mark. What are the considerations of TIC Council in a scope? Well, we have found that there is some, let's say, interpretable definitions, such as the lack of guidance of internet-connected radio equipment. I'm sure that all the manufacturers have struggled with this definition. And well, we consider as a TIC Council the term to be broader interpretation than the one that we have right now, which is that the equipment connects itself to internet, meaning that has some protocols ready, like TCP/IP. So we believe that because of the risk assessment, there are other paths where the device can be compromised. For example, it should include, we believe that this definition should include any data pathway to or from the internet. So for example, if there are assets pushed to internet or get from the internet, or there are firmwares from internet that will be placed in this device that in principle it's not in the scope of the RED Delegated Act, then it can be an issue. Okay, so we need to take into account to do a thorough risk assessment and consider the product's intended use, but also foreseeable usage. So maybe some misuse can happen here. Additionally, there were some discussions on the definitions of other terms, such as processing and personal data. We think that these two terms should be aligned with other legislative definitions, such as the one of the GDPR. In the same way, we have other directives, such as ECI Privacy Directive, that also defines other terms that are not maybe not well defined on the documentation from the RED Delegated Act and so on, which is traffic data and location data. And in the same way, virtual currency, we believe that should be defined exactly in the same way that the directive on combating fraud and counterfeiting. So let's move on the case scenarios in the scope of out of the scope. So we think, or the discussions are in the line where we believe that the assessment of the whether a device falls inside of the RED Delegated Act depends on the device itself. So also the environment in which it operates and the intended use and the risk assessment, of course. Why do we say that? Well, we have in scope of the RED Delegated Act any device that can communicate itself over the internet. And to do so, the manufacturers, as we said, should conduct a comprehensive risk assessment. And as we said before, we need to take into account the foreseeable use, but also misuse. And there is a specific mention on this on the Blue Guide in Chapter 2.8 that you can check. Because, well, we have seen some news, some attacks on the field, that some devices that somebody may believe that were not in the scope of the RED Delegated Act has been hacked. For example, the breach in the Tesla Model 3S or the casino fish tank hack, where there were some devices, in the case of the Tesla model, that were not connected to internet, but through the Bluetooth interface, an attacker was able to exploit some vulnerabilities by pushing some code on the ECU module from the car. So this kind of examples is giving us the let's say, the risk that can pose a device which is not well risk assessed. So please take into account into your scope devices to make the risk assessment according to use, but also the possible misuse when you define all the risks. And finally, all scope devices, I think this is clear for everyone, but there's articles that are outlining there are some devices that are not falling into scope, such as medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, but also other regulations related to motor and aviation. And finally, let's move to the scope of the EN8031 series. So as you know, the CINCENELEC published the EN8031 series in August 2024. And it's becoming harmonized, but it's not there. So now the European Commission should decide whether to publish or not, or if there is any other change on this series, okay? You will see that there is decision trees that will help you to guide you into the justifications, meaning that manufacturers must conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment, but also must conduct these decision trees that will help you to analyze whether a certain requirement it's applicable to your product or not. Additionally, there's alternative paths, such as other standards. You can, as a manufacturer, you can directly apply essential requirements or refer to the standardization request to choose any relevant standard. But of course, this approach necessitates much involvement with the MV and much more justifications that if there is another alternative path that has been analyzed before against compliance on the Red Delegated Act. So about alternative compliant path, we can say that there is interplay with the existing standards like ETSI EN 303645 and Industrial Series 62443. But TIC Council advised careful use of Annex CMV. So these are only informative. There are some maybe wide assumptions. So it has to be applied, but taking care of the casuistics of every product. And of course, you can use these standards, but you should go through a notified body. And it is well known that you need to do a delta, so it's not direct compliant at all. And additionally, the notified body reviews the manufacturer justification and assess the essential requirements. And if insufficient justification is provided, then the notified body should reject issuing EU type examination certificate. Okay. So I think that's all. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to try to stop.
Thank you very much.
Sharing.
Thank you very much, Nuria, for this comprehensive overview. I think you already touched upon very important things, like the potential overlaps with other legislation like the CRA, the standardization, the 18031 series. So perhaps I see we have two questions in the chat, and we have 5 minutes for the Q&A. So the first one is asked by Cesar. He asked about what are the chances that the EN 18031 series will be harmonized. Nuria, anything to say on this?
Yeah.
Perhaps this could be a question for the Commission.
Yeah, maybe a question for the Commission, or maybe also for any notified body that is here that may have more information than me. My view here is that, there is, as you know, there were this publication of the EN series. There were some, positive votes from CINCENELEC, but then has consultant had some constraints on that. So I think that today we are, waiting for the Commission opinion or Commission perspective on what are they going to do? Are they going to accept the comments? No, they are going to require some other changes. Well, this is the information that I have right now, but maybe there was somebody as notified body that can also clarify also this point. They have more information than me.
Perfect, thank you. I think I'm going to pick another question related to the 18031 and basically with the compliant process. Mohammed is asking, when using a notified body, could we use the EN 18031, or even with a notified body, we still cannot use the EN 18031 until it's harmonized? So again, similar question, but I think if you can give it like a clear orientation, like when they can use manufacturers or not this EN 18031, I think that's the main question here.
Yeah, well, this is a very important question. So right now, there is no harmonized standard. We have EN 8031, but it's not harmonized. So that means that Module A as a self-assessment cannot be used. So now the only possibility that we have is that you go through a third-party assessment. So that means that you need to choose a notified body. And of course, this notified body can use this standard, may require this standard to be passed, because at the end is the standard that we have closer to comply with the essential requirements for cybersecurity. But nowadays, to have a clear answer, nowadays we don't have this harmonized standard yet. So the only possibility right now is to go through a notified body.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Nuria, and all who participated. I'm sure we could spend 1 more hour discussing about the compliance and the challenges we'll face with the Red Delegated Act, but I think the next panel is also very, very interesting. So I would like just to jump to the next panel, which is the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act roundtable. As I said before, the CRA, I think, is groundbreaking, no? Legislation, cybersecurity legislation, no, mandating cybersecurity for products and expanding not beyond the focus on critical infrastructure funding in previous legislation, like for example the NIS2 directive. No, so it's broad and deep scope, I think, is what makes the CRA unique some way. No, it also has different requirements for manufacturers. The requirements set out in Annex 1, also technical documentation for users to be aware of their IoT devices, the requirements they meet. And in this way, recently, or some months ago already, the Commission sent a draft standardization request to Sensenelec to start developing standards. Well, so I think it's quite topical. So in the next coming months, I guess the CRA will be published in the EU official journal, and then the implementation timeline will officially kick off. To have this 3-year transition period, so we can expect full implementation by somehow November, late November 2027. So without further ado, let me briefly present you the speakers who will be joining this roundtable. In the first place, we have Felipe Jones Morao, who is the policy officer at European Commission DG Connect. He's working on cybersecurity policy with a particular emphasis on technical standards. Thank you for joining. We also have Maxime Hernandez, who is leading product development of IoT cybersecurity service portfolio and operations of cybersecurity laboratories globally for TÜV. He's also the vice chair of TIC Council's Conformity Assessment of Connected Devices Working Group. Maxime is currently based in China, bringing solutions to European vendors and Asian manufacturers for consumer products. And he has also experience in other areas like automotive, aerospace, and robotic organizations in both Europe and Asia. Then we also have Matteo Mollet, who is a manager for cybersecurity technologies and innovation at the European Cybersecurity Organization, where he coordinates activities focusing on policy implementation, standardization, and certification. And Matteo, he is active in European cybersecurity fora and gained experience working for different multinational cybersecurity providers. And last but of course not least, Claudio Teixeira, a legal officer on digital policy at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization working on telecommunications and cybersecurity. Before, Claudio served as junior legal attaché in the permanent representation of Portugal, having worked on digital files like the Digital Markets Act. So thank you all very much for joining us in this roundtable discussion on key cybersecurity legislation. So I want to start with an opening question to set the scene. I will ask you all the same, and I will appreciate if you can spend maybe 5 minutes maximum on your reply. So of course, we all know that recently in Brussels, in the EU bubble, there has been a lot of focus on effective implementation on EU legislation. This is reflected in the Council's conclusions on the future of digital policy, the mission letters themselves to Commissioner designates proposing implementation dialogues with the stakeholders, including the one for Henna Virkunen on cybersecurity, and various industry associations calling not to rethink twice before proposing new legislation to ensure that the current framework is well implemented. So in the context of the CRA, after everything I told, what do you think will be the main challenges for effective implementation and compliance? Perhaps we could start with Felipe and follow the same order as I introduce all the speakers.
Sure. Thanks, Angel. Hi, everyone. Thanks also to the previous speaker for the great presentation. So this I think is a really key question for us now, as the CRA is on the verge of being adopted. Signature of the legal text took place last week, and we expect the publication in the official journal in a couple of weeks, basically. So in terms of the main challenges for effective implementation, I would like to highlight one that I have noticed since I started working on this file. So as you said before, Angel, the CRA is the first legislation to make security mandatory, basically across the board, right, with a large scope. And so I think that the main challenge for an effective implementation is this cultural flip. We need to start moving away from this notion where security was only for high-risk cases, and security was case by case, product by product, different paradigms depending on the sector or whatever. And actually, security is security. And of course, for higher risks, you want more security, and for lower risks, you want less security. But what's currently missing is a language to talk about this. We don't have a language to talk about how to have low security for lower risks. So therefore, there's no proportionality in how people think about security. If somebody says everybody needs security, people freak out because they think that means everybody needs to have military-grade security. It doesn't have to be that way. So I think this is the biggest challenge, is for the first time to really start thinking about security systematically, coherently across the board in a proportionate, risk-based way. And yes, I have many ideas on how to do that. We've already been discussing with the experts, with the standardizers. It's a really exciting time for cybersecurity. I think the CRA is going to make a step change in how we think and talk about cybersecurity in society. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Felipe. Indeed, the CRA will mark before and after in terms of cybersecurity legislation for sure in the EU. Maxime, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Angel. Yeah, also one big challenge is for manufacturer to prepare for this, meaning get the budget to upgrade their product, define if some products need to be end of life or if they need to renew the portfolio. And of course, the people who are creating the product. So all the engineer, all the staff need to be also trained on cybersecurity. And we know globally there is a shortage of cybersecurity relevant qualified people. So this is also one big challenge we see in the industry currently. And of course, the salary also of cybersecurity experts is also a big challenge because for a lot of product manufacturer, all this is additional cost that might be difficult to showcase to the final customer. So also these are big challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxime. Indeed, there are different challenges regarding the good implementation for manufacturers, and perhaps this could be a good moment for Mateo from EXO to give us your view on the topic.
Yes, I think I can basically reiterate what has been said before. Indeed, cybersecurity tends to be a buzzword sometimes, but whether you do reactive monitoring or monitor the access of people or entering your system. I mean, there's a lot of level and layers, right? We can definitely, I think the CRA is really gonna bring things forward. More or less a year ago at EXO, we had an extensive talk with our members, and we still doing so, and we identified a number of priorities. We even let's say scale them based on the urgency for them. So I'm not going to repeat them all. What I can say is that as we go through, we're clarifying a lot of these. So they stay the same, but maybe the magnitude, the clarity is improving. What I'd like to mention on top of what was said before is that obviously what manufacturers are really interested in keen on learning more is understanding where their product, in what category their product are falling. So basically the clarity on product category is very important, and the European Commission has been working a lot this summer on clarifying this. Let me give a different perspective. We heard a bit less from SMEs in these discussions, which could be simply that everything is clear for them, but I suspect that another challenge for implementation of CRA is lack of awareness from a large part of the market.
Thank you, Matteo. Claudio, would you like to share the consumer's perspective on the CRA?
Thank you very much, Angel. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much to the Tech Council for organizing this event and for the invitation for BILC to present the consumer perspective. Always a pleasure. From our side, this has been something that has been long awaited by consumer organizations. In fact, we can even go as far as to say that this has been a policy that was essentially driven by the pushback of consumer organizations over the past decade, repeatedly flagging the issues that have been encountered on the market. We have very active members engaged in product testing, and it was them throughout the last decade that have consistently raised the flag about how consumer devices in particular, but not only, in general, most all IoT devices that are used on a common basis on everyday life are incredibly vulnerable to attack. And even those that in fact are part of your inner sanctum of your home, which are in contact with you, with your children, that are constantly monitoring you, capturing audio, video, God knows what else. And it was shocking for us to understand just how vulnerable these products were. Just to give you a quick idea, if we take a rough estimate of everything we had analyzed over the years, we could say roughly 2/3 of every product that we were testing had a severe or critical vulnerability. So that gives you pretty much an idea of the scale of the problem that we were facing. And one of the major issues we had was precisely that we did not have transversal, horizontal standards. Sorry, we're not use standards in this in this context, but requirements that would apply to all products to ensure they would be cyber secure by design and by default. So that's the game changer factor that the CRA brings and that we've been consistently calling for. Of course, now, like in all legislations, there is its shortcomings, there is its positive aspects, but there is no denying about it. I fully agree with Philippe there when he says that this is indeed a game changer. There's a culture shift because now we have a language, now we have a basis on which to build a culture of cybersecurity and a framework on which to hold accountable the manufacturers who rush products into the market without ensuring that these are first cyber secure by design and by default. So that is the major contribution we have here. Of course, like in all issues, the devil's in the details, so enforcement will be key. We always say this, that enforcement will be a key factor, and here as well. And one of the issues that arises from the implementation of legislation under the NFL that has really concerns us very much is that the fact that resources are going to be a fundamental issue going forward. That is why we appreciate that there was a higher role of the Commission being played here. It's a specifically dedicated role to ENISA, but we are still very much wary of the fact that when it comes to national authorities, that we might still suffer significant bottlenecks, that we might still have a significant lack of enforcement precisely because there's simply not enough resources. So it is necessary to build not just a framework, but also provide the actors that play these essential roles in this framework to play their role appropriately, but also understanding that they can only do so much, and when that is the case, to pitch to tap in other organizations who can help and create synergies. And here I specifically talk about consumer organizations, which, as I've started by saying, have a long culture of market monitoring, market screening, and to raise flags every time we find non-conformity situations. So it is by tapping into this already resource that is installed, this potential that is installed capacity, that we can create a better culture for market screening and market monitoring. And from our side, we are more than willing to assist national authorities on this task and to flag any situation that needs attention. But of course, even then, we can only go so far. I think when it comes down to the essential part of the regulation, it all comes down to political will, and it also always comes down to enforcers' action. And this is why we call on the Commission to ensure that although the CRA has a very, very long date for implementation, this is going to take a few years. We hope that this is not an excuse for the enforcers to sit idle and already start actively, proactively acting towards ensuring that we start seeing some compliance being enacted there. And I think the current mapping of standards that is already going on is a very promising sign to that fact. Also, the constitution of an expert group to ensure that the secondary legislation goes smoothly. So, as I say, it's a very interesting stage, it's a very dynamic stage, and from our side, we're very much committed to ensure as well that we can roll out this framework as soon as possible, and not just think that this is something that only comes back to us in 3 years. This is something that we need to start constantly acting now. And from our side, that is going to be the challenge, to ensure that we act sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, Claudio. Indeed, you perfectly show the importance of cybersecurity, that nowadays it affects basically all devices. No need to be cyber resilient and secure for consumers, not only the critical sector or infrastructure. Perhaps now let me change. We talk about implementation challenges. We've seen many topics already, to the other part of the roundtable, like the standardization process. Nuria already talking about the Red Delegated Act, talk about the 18031 standards. Why is it important? So perhaps Maxime, as a representative from a TIC company that work with standards really closely, could you explain us in simple terms why a standardization process is so critical for cybersecurity legislation, and how can TIC companies assist manufacturers in meeting CRA requirements and compliance ahead of the deadline of 2027, as Claudio very well explained, that we need to comply before the deadline?
So in the CRA text itself, you have technical requirements, but the technical requirements are still high-level requirements. And for manufacturers to prepare for compliance, they will need more detailed requirements. Also for the industry to clarify if two products do meet the same requirement, we need standards to establish that these two products meet indeed the requirement. Because when you have a requirement, there is a different way to test it, there's a different way to evaluate it. And with a clear standard, you can ensure that each test will have the same test result. And that will what happen next. So the first step would be, of course, the CRA promulgation. Then there will be the standard request, and the standard request will be sent to likely the Senelec and the HC. And in these two standardization organizations, you have a lot of members from the industry, including members from TIC industry. And the members from the TIC industry bring to the standard the real-life testing experience, because sometimes in the committee, the testing requirements are a little bit high level, or sometimes doesn't take into account some product specificity. So the target is to bring the experience from all the lab who are every day testing in their lab with their engineer, all kind of product, and all this experience to ensure repeatable testing is brought during the writing of the standards. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Maxime. I think the next question somehow it's going to be for Philippe as the Commission representative. of course, we know that I think it was in April that the Commission already sent a draft standardization request to the European standardization bodies. Of course, we're still waiting for the official approval and the publication in the official journal. But do you know how the process is going? How the Commission is following the development of the standard to avoid any potential delay as the one that happened specifically related to the 18031 for the Red Delegated Act? And anything you could tell us about how the process is going with Sensenelec and ETSI?
Yes. So the standardization request at the moment, it's actually been through sort of its third round of comments with the ESOs.
Okay.
And now it's sort of finalizing the internal steps so that we can send it to the member states as part of the comitology procedure. So there's this committee on standards where the member states are represented, that they discuss and vote on the standardization request so that it can be sent to the ESOs. So that's exactly the stage that we're in, just before it goes to the member states. So hopefully, the latest version, for the ESOs, the NSPs, anybody who's really closely connected to that process, they've seen this latest version of the text, and that's basically the one that's going to be sent to the member states. And there aren't a lot of changes in substance because we've been through it's the third iteration. So there was a few changes in substance from the first to the second, but really that was already the result of a year of discussion. So after that, it's more sort of procedural and formal aspects that have been changed. So that's essentially the situation. In terms of delays in the standards, it's a difficult thing, it's a lot of work. It does mean bringing together a lot of expertise. I would say the main challenge is, it's not necessarily something that the Commission can avoid. It's something that is because it requires so many stakeholders to come onto the table. So I think what's really important is that stakeholders are as aware as possible and are engaging from the beginning. And that's why the Commission is also engaging from the beginning in this process, basically to try to reduce that lag. But I would say, even for the red standards, they achieved a great work. It was a huge amount of effort in a short amount of time, and there was a little delay. It was mostly a delay from the standardizer side, not from the Commission. So I think what we are trying to do is to say, okay, so even to prevent that delay, we are from the beginning engaging, and I've been personally engaging for the last year and a half quite intensively. But it's not just to make sure that there are no delays. It's really to make sure that things are clear. Because the delays, they represent, moments where there's lack of clarity, or where fundamentally where there's confusion, where people are unsure, that's when they don't want to move forward. So really the job is to say, okay, to really basically explain as many times as is needed what's in the CRA, what are the regulatory expectations. There are some things that the text is not so clear about, and these have got to do more with the ecosystem aspects, the supply chain aspects. The CRA gives us a very, very strong legal basis to do a lot of things, but now we need to enter this phase of dialogue of implementation with the companies to say, what is the best way to actually implement some of these provisions, and then what are the implications as you go deeper and deeper into the details. Decisions do need to be taken at each level of granularity. None of those are directly in the text, right? Because the text only has the high level provision. So this is where the regulatory expectation, together with proportionality, together with the industry expertise, together with stakeholder voices, is so important. And this is a process that just takes some time. And so the sooner that all these discussions can start, all the questions and problems can be identified, the better everybody can process them. So that's what basically we're doing, and hoping that that will facilitate everyone's work, because really we recognize it's a lot of work. We want everybody to be able to come at the table, and so that's what we're doing. And I think for now I think it's working, even though the standardization request is not out. Actually, standardization work has started. So it's a clear sign that the experts are understanding what's going to be needed. And they understand that, it doesn't really matter when the standardization request is adopted. The deadline is the deadline for the CRA. So everybody wants to try to come out with these standards as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Felipe, for this good overview and insights on the standardization process that you are directly involved. Maybe if you allow me a follow-up question, really short, you can see just a couple minutes, because I know there are many manufacturers in this webinar, and I don't know if you had a chance to read this NISA paper that maps the cybersecurity, the CRA requirements and the standards mapping, which is I recommend everyone to have a look. And of course, one of the standards they map is the ETSI EN 303-645, which is widely used for IoT. So you that you have been involved in conversations, can manufacturers demonstrate potentially in the future compliance by using, for example, this standard I just mentioned, the ETSI 303-645? What's the conversations on this using other existing standards already in place?
I mean, if you read that report, the answer should be clear, right? The answer is already in that report. So basically, the ETSI 303-645 takes an idealized IoT product with an idealized environment and says, based on this idealized product, these are the requirements that you should have. Now, there's two aspects here. First of all, the CRA covers a lot of different environments, a lot of different use cases. So if you have the right environment and the right use case in mind and the right type of product, it could be that the ETSI 303-645 is at the right level for you. In that case, great, that's going to be a good starting point. But still, there's another aspect, which is actually which requirements are there. And again, what's in that report by JRC and ENISA is that no existing standard covers all of the requirements in the CRA. And this is particularly for one requirement, the data minimization requirement, which traditionally was a data protection requirement, but has been included here for sort of completeness and coherence with the rest of the legislation. So what that means is that none of the existing frameworks that have been identified take this requirement into account. Now, there is an international standard on data minimization, so it's not necessarily like a big roadblock, but just to say, just looking at a single standard isn't going to be sufficient for anyone. That's basically the outcome of the analysis in that report by JRC and ENISA. But the idea is that we're going to ask we are asking the standardizers to look at all the existing standards, which is basically a kind of statement of where are we in terms of the state of the art. So okay, let's pick and choose from all the existing standards and bring everything that we need for the CRA in order to make it easy for the manufacturers, right? So the idea is really to bring together all that knowledge that's again fragmented landscape, right? So the idea is to kind of converge that landscape into a single European document that manufacturers can say, okay, if I want to comply in Europe, this is what I need to follow.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Maybe now let me ask Matteo, as a representative from the European cybersecurity organizations. Many of your members are also manufacturers, so perhaps maybe it's too early, but do you know if manufacturers have already started to implement or look forward, thinking how to apply the CRA, and also what do you consider, in the view of a manufacturer in this case, what are the greatest uncertainties in its implementation and application? Do you have any take on this, Matteo?
Well, on this one, I would say the perception that we have is the same one, is basically linked to the first question that you asked me before. So let's say a manufacturer are excited about the CRA. Some of the conversation that I had with the manufacturers, but other market operators, is really that this is different, this is big, and this is coming. So that's also what we try to reiterate, so that the market is ready. Some people told me, okay, this is creating attention because we're not talking just about a fine, we're talking about I can place my product on the market if I don't comply to this. So this is something that's creating a lot of excitement and attention. As I said in when you asked me the initial question, great excitement is to understand where their products are falling, in what category they're falling. And, the first-in-class manufacturers, the one that have a good security practice, that have a BCP, DRP, they have like a product security team, they are already doing probably more than what the CRA is asking. Let's say what the industry is looking for is being sure that they find way to show compliance to this regulation and that they do it so in the right way. Aside of that, obviously there's a lot of discussion obviously on the standards. As Felipe said, we're also heavily involved on that. Some players are also working obviously on automated tools to understand where organizations are standing vis-a-vis of the compliance CRA. As I said again, because it's similar to the previous question you asked me, I would say industry is not one unique block. There's a lot of actors. There are the best-in-class players that probably, as I said, they're preparing themselves for compliance, showing compliance. There's another big part of the market, notably SMEs, that basically just need to be more aware about this. And if you think about in a supply chain perspective, often all this is interconnected. So it doesn't mean that if you have a big cybersecurity player with years of experience, probably is selling or acquiring components from other companies that are not as aware. So at this level, I would say they're very engaged with all the initiatives that are going on, being those projects or European Commission consultations. We also try to work a bit on piloting some use cases, but obviously this is a bit more a theoretical exercise.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matteo. Perhaps now, Claudio, a question for you. Many might remember, compared to the original proposal from the Commission of the CRA, the scope of important and critical products has been narrowed, compared to this first proposal. So from a consumer protection perspective, Claudio, do you fear that secondary legislation that the Commission might take in the coming months couldn't even narrow more the scope of the devices affected by the CRA obligations, important critical products, thus weakening the overall cybersecurity of products? What is your position on this topic?
Thanks for the question. Indeed, from our side, this is always a big concern. Because as we look into what has been the negotiations at the legislative stage with Council and Parliament, we do believe that we already have seen quite a sufficient narrowing of the initially planned broader scope of the CRA. Not to say that we haven't seen a lot of improvements in the proposal. When it comes to consumer products, we have, and we're very much happy to see that compared to the original proposal, now the current proposal has specifically predicted consumer products, specifically those which you consider more sensitive consumer products, say connected toys, alarm systems, automatic digital locks, security cameras, virtual assistants, IoT, house servers, that kind of stuff. That at that moment wasn't actually part of the proposal at all. So now that we have actually seen the prediction of these, the provision of these specific products in Annex 3, there is a necessity to ensure that the definitions when it comes to the secondary legislation are indeed adequately reflect the kind of devices that were actually intended by the legislators to keep in the Council and Parliament positions. Of course, our position was a bit more ambitious. From our perspective, consumer devices that are in a possibility to harm consumers, well, not just physically, but when it comes to their fundamental rights, say right to privacy. This is something to take very, very seriously, and these are clearly the kind of devices that, in our view, should have required a third-party assessment. We didn't get as far, but now that we do have at least predicted that, we need to make sure that these products are indeed held to a higher standard of conformity assessment and are part of this amazingly large pool of devices left to self-assessment. With all due respect to the manufacturers, these devices do need a higher standard of a higher standard of compliance, and they need to be a bit more protected. So from our side, it is essential now. We're going to have an expert group specific to advise the Commission with a broad range of stakeholders on how this secondary legislation is going to be rolled out. This is something else so that we champion very much. We call on the Commission basically to have a very broad representation of the stakeholders involved and to hear their concerns. And we really expect to see that, especially when it comes to the civil society, specifically consumer organizations, that our concerns are represented when it comes to the definition of these products, to make sure that the categories that we have in the proposal right now are not now artificially narrowed, and we ensure that the protection is indeed provided on the devices that that should be. So that is definitely one of our major concerns.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Claudio. Maybe as to do a recap, I have a question for you, Maxine, that you work closely with standards, so, and also for the audience. So first, we had the ETSI EN 303-645, which is this widely accepted standard for IoT devices. Then now we have the red Cybersecurity EN 18031 that will apply for the red delegated act, and in the next years we'll have new standards for the CRA for the CRA. So with so much change happening, is the industry learning how to create more easy to apply and reliable standard? Do you see a progression that helps manufacturers and others to better apply these standards? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult activity. And also, what I did mention, that the 1 year delay for the RED was also caused for the standardization activity for the 18031 standard. In the committee, you also have a lot of experts. They need to agree on topic. They need to agree on the level of detail that need to be written in the standards. Also, for example, if you look at the EN 33645, which is high-level requirement, ETSI added in the past a guidance, the TS 103701, which has become the tested guideline for everybody. Now for the RED, for the 18031, you can already have a lot of information for the testing information, but it takes time to build consensus between organization, between experts, and it's not an easy solution. And also for the manufacturer, it's good they participate in the committee so they can also bring their point of view of the difficulty, what need to be done. But we also need to have, of course, the participation of the lab, which we have key council member to really explain that our standard need to be written in the way to ensure to have repeatable result when you perform testing, so we are able to compare two products. That's the main point. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Maxine. Maybe before a final statement, and then we can open for some Q&A questions that I invite all the participants to write in the chat. Felipe and actually Claudio touched upon secondary legislation, but I think this could be a good wrap up. Felipe, of course, secondary legislation will play a very important role when it comes to the implementation of the CRA. So would like to ask what are DG Connect's plans for issuing these delegated acts, and specifically, do you consider amending Annex 3 and 4 now for important products and in critical products, if you have anything to tell us about the incoming secondary legislation?
Sure, Phil, thanks. Actually, there's a lot of different questions in that question. So maybe just to say from the start, for instance, even though we recognize that the technical descriptions are a useful element to give some certainty to the manufacturers, it doesn't change a lot to how they have to comply with the CRA. You might think that it's a very visible change, whether you need to go to a third party or whether you can self-assess. And obviously, in certain sense, that is true. But in fact, the conformity assessment activities and the requirements that you need to implement do not change, whether you are in or out. Because, of course, being in is a general indicator that it's a more high-risk product. But many of these products have low-risk use cases. And it's the use case that determines the risk level, obviously, together with the product itself, right? So, so just because a product is a critical product, just because a product is an important class 1 or important class 2 product, does not mean that it has all the same conformity assessment, does not mean that it's always the same risk level. Okay, the risk is much more sensitive than that, right? The risk analysis takes into account the environment, the use case, etc. So really the intended purpose, the reasonably foreseeable use of the manufacturer are what's going to determine how you implement the essential requirements. And again, that's going to be, you know, you can have a high risk use case that is a default product and that can self-assess, or you can have a low risk use case that's critical. And really, you know, in some ways we can think of these Annex 3 and 4 as more a kind of supply chain consideration. These are products that, because they're generally critical for the whole sort of digital infrastructure of the EU member states, then, you know, it's kind of considered that it's good that these go to a third party for a kind of, you know, extra trust in the supply chain. It's not specifically about which essential requirements or what level of risk that the product concretely has for a given use case. So that's I think one useful point. And of course, you know, we're going to need to repeat this many times, and we're going to need to have some discussion on, you know, hopefully, again, that's also in Article 27, the article on guidance. That's one of the points where the legislator has asked the Commission to give guidance on, right, is on the risk assessment, how we think about risk classification, how we think about this connection between the use cases and the requirements. I think that's going to be a key aspect. It's also one that we're already bringing up with the standardizer so that they can also include this. So we've been repeatedly saying that the standards should have some form of risk levels, and that would allow, rather than having just a single statement that is supposed to apply to all of these products and covering, you know, this infinite amount of use cases, it's much better to maybe have low, medium, high, which means we now have 3 statements, and you can have, you know, an average low, an average medium, and an average high, and that's actually much more proportionate, much easier to reduce the complexity of infinite use cases to 3 classes than to a single class, right? Which then is just like gravitating around this low average, which actually doesn't make anyone happy. So much easier to have that real discussion about risk levels, and that's something that I'm really looking forward to going forward. Okay, having said that, so for the secondary legislation, the first one that we've been focusing on is these technical descriptions, because of course we realize that people like certainty, you know, definitions is always where people get stuck. So we've been trying to advance that, and there was a set of workshops before the summer. Maybe some of you heard about that. So where we received a bunch of input from a lot of stakeholders, and we've been fine-tuning those, and we want to be able to come out with public consultation on those definitions before the end of the year. You know, the actual adoption process is always going to take several months, because it's just, you know, the adoption processes are always heavy, and that's kind of life. But we hope that this public consultation will already send a strong signal about how we are thinking about this, and, you know, can also advance a bit the discussion with the stakeholders. And yeah, basically, because we know that despite what I said, despite the fact that the CRA needs to be applied in a risk-based way, people still pay so much attention to the formal aspects of this, that we tried to front load this and to accelerate this as much as we could in order to start giving, you know, some legal certainty, even though, you know, it's never going to come, you know, as soon as people would like. It's always going to take, the statutory deadline is 12 months after the adoption. If we get this out like 9 months or 7 months after the adoption, that's already going to be a huge luxury, right? I mean, I think everybody should know that these public processes of adopting, of implementing acts, even though they're much lighter than legislation, they're still going to take a considerable number of months. So that's the main thing, is really that, you know, the solution to everyone's problems is not these delegated acts per se. It's thinking about the risk and thinking about how we have security across different risk levels. That's really, you know, the key for cracking the CRA for everyone, and having a discussion on what are reasonable requirements for different risk levels. Then there's actually a number of other secondary legislation in the CRA that I think we are looking at those and saying, okay, we have a lot of work to do for this implementation. There's a lot of work with stakeholders to be done. So I think we also need to kind of prioritize a little bit. There's a number of secondary legislation that could be done, for instance, on the presumption of conformity for protection profiles and cybersecurity certification schemes, which I think will also facilitate a lot. And in a sense, we're kind of thinking of these cybersecurity certification schemes as a kind of alternative form of the harmonized standards, right? They already exist on the market. Some manufacturers are already used to working with those. So if we can have those to also give compliance to the CRA, then maybe we don't even need to develop the standards for those. So that's at the moment where we're kind of like trying to have this discussion with ENISA and with stakeholders to kind of say, hey, you know, this is a little bit up to industry, right? If industry prefers to do this with cybersecurity certification, we're fine with that. We'll just give presumption of conformity to those as long as they meet requirements of the CRA. If not, we need to develop the harmonized standards. We need you to let us know ASAP, so that you know we are pushing that process. But ultimately, I think it's nice that because it was such a green field, right? So many of these sectors and products didn't have cybersecurity mandated in the past. Then we can really choose, you know, what's actually the best way to do this, and we want to choose, you know, we want to choose that based on what industry wants to do, because we want it to be easy for you to comply. So that's one thing. And on making any changes to Annex 3 and 4, the answer for now is a clear no. So the legislation is just coming out, right? There's an Annex 3 and a 4. There's no reason for us to try to change that. We haven't even tried to implement this, right? So I think, of course, it could be that in, you know, as part of the general review process of European legislation every 5 years, we could think, oh, you know, actually this category, maybe it wasn't as critical as we thought it was, or maybe it was, but maybe there are specific issues that mean it should be removed. That's possible, but it could also be that there's new products that have evolved and that become critical and that need to be added. So all of that will be part, you know, I think will mostly be considered as part of the general review process of the CRA. We really need to give this a shot, right? We need to try if we can implement what's there in the legal text, what was the democratic mandate, and then based on that, see how society responds. And I think, you know, that's the healthy dialogue that really needs to happen, is, you know, observe what are the impacts of this once it's on the ground, and then make any assessment of whether something needs to be changed. That's not going to happen in the immediate. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Felipe, for this very well overview of the upcoming different public consultations, and I'm sure all the stakeholders will be participating and contributing, and this good overview. Thank you very much. Maybe I don't see many questions in the chat, so perhaps we can do a last final round of intervention so you can conclude and basically look in the way forward. Now we have the CRA, but do we expect any other legislation for the coming already in place mandate? What's your take on this, a bit on the way forward? Perhaps we can start maybe with Claudio.
So from our side, it's very much second what Philippe said, but also focusing on the aspect that when we look at what the reality is on the ground for consumer organizations, and that the reports that are coming from our members, it is very clear that no matter how much enforcement we have, and it will never be enough. That's a given. But at the same time, we need to also be prepared. I think it's something we haven't covered here, to the situation when everything else fails. Because again, enforcement might do a great job, and we might in fact have this rolled out great in a couple of years. But ultimately, at the end of the game, it is also important to realize what to do when everything else fails, when harm has been done. And on this legislation, we have managed to secure a very important advancement, just to ensure that consumers have access to like a collective redress and representative actions. And I think it's something that is not very much discussed, but the issue that to ensure enforcement also by ensuring that redress is made easier, simple, and accessible to consumers is very much important. Because at the end of the day, if you do have that incentive to comply, because you know the market monitoring is working well, but also that consumers are alert and are reacting after the harm has been done, this is a very important incentive as well. And for that, indeed, we need awareness. And this is where we also need that culture change. For too many times, we've had this burden of proof reversed, in which that somehow it seems that consumers, which are the weakest link in this whole chain, should have to bear all the responsibilities. You know, either they're not tech savvy, either they're not cyber aware, either they're simply not trained enough. We need to reverse this trend in which we take the burden out of the weakest chain in the link, and we place it on those who actually have the capacity to take on this burden, which is the manufacturers. They are the ones who make sure that the products, when they're put out on the market, they are cyber secure by design and by default. and that they are safe to handle by those which could be tech savvy, could not be tech savvy. That is not the point. The point is that consumers have a natural expectation that when they buy a product, this product is safe, this product is secure. They are not the ones who have to go around doing the assessment and others doing that for them. So once that harm is produced, it is very much fundamental that we ensure that consumers have awareness, yes, but to assess the risks and to know where to go once the damage happens, because they will keep happening, and we need to make sure that consumers are protected then, that they have a safety net. And that in itself, it will be certainly a very important incentive to ensure more compliance, but also a great tool to ensure more market monitoring and more flagging of situations that would otherwise go unnoticed. So on that note, I would stop here, and thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Maybe very quickly, last comment, the way forward for cybersecurity legislation in the EU. Maxim, Matteo, whoever wants to go first.
Maybe I will go first. Yeah, so we see with the RVD coming in 2025, the CRA coming 3 years later, and in other regions of the world, also more regulation coming. So product security is the new normal for manufacturer, but still a big challenge and still a big step to climb. And TIC Council member, all the lab can provide the expertise how to assess product. And for this, I think manufacturer can also use this experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo.
Okay, then other things have been said, so I'll be quicker. Look, when it comes to Cyber Resilience Act, we think that, the essential requirements are essential, right? If we manage to implement these across the industry, we will definitely raise the cybersecurity posture of Europe. And that's something we welcome. I think we are in a new era. For those of you who have worked in cybersecurity or network security or whatever other software applications, you know how complex these areas are. So we're in a new era where not only we need legislation and regulation, but how we implement this will be key. And as we said from today, is that the devil's in the detail. We need to work out how this is going to be implemented. And I think everyone is eager to cooperate, but there's a lot of work indeed, and that's where we're going to focus at EXO.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matteo. I think we run a bit of time. Felipe, I take your last intervention as your last word, unless you want to say something else. But thank you all for coming today, to attending, especially to our panelists, also Nuria, who interviewed first. You can find the QR code to our position paper on the red delegated act that we presented. And yes, without further ado, thank you very much. Let's keep in touch. If you have any questions, you have my email there, and have a lovely rest of the day and week. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Bye.